What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. With the off season happening right now and there not being a lot of news or just kind of stories to cover here on this channel, I've had this video concept that I've been wanting to put out for you guys for a little while now, and I've been researching it for a few weeks, and finally I've been able to put it together for you. Now, the NHL is a very vast history. Hockey is exciting, it's dramatic, and there are some events that some of you guys may have never even heard of before. So today I've compiled a list of 7 crazy NHL stories that almost seem fake because they're just so ridiculous. These are stories from the past that some of you might not actually believe because they're just so far out there. This includes some of the craziest stories from franchises when they first entered the league, and some franchises who almost were kicked out of the league. Now, if you guys have been enjoying the content lately and you like this video concept and want to see more of these stories once you're done watching, make sure you hit that subscribe button, comment what you think about this below, and let's get right into this one. First story on my list. This is about the St. Louis Blues. Now, when they first entered the league, they were a very reliable and consistent organization. In fact, they were basically the definition of average, barely making the playoffs every year and never really reaching the finals or getting through that final hump to win themselves a Stanley Cup championship. But in fact, in their early days, the St. Louis Blues did something that no other organization has ever done throughout NHL history. Like I mentioned, the St. Louis Blues were very consistent and respectable as a franchise throughout their early days. However, in the 70s and early 80s, the team started to slip from their success, making the playoffs only 9 out of 12 times, but only managing to put up 2 winning seasons in that stretch. The long-term outlook for the Blues seemed bleak, and their ownership group recognized this in 1977, attempting to sell the franchise and its rights to a Canadian ownership group that would relocate the Blues to Saskatoon, something the NHL was very opposed to because of the small market. The situation dragged on, and eventually the NHL decided to vote on the sale, with 15 out of 18 voting against the movement of the team. The ownership group would then file a $60 million lawsuit against the NHL, shutting down all of its sales and hockey operations. While all of this was happening, the NHL draft was still held, and the Blues organization decided they were going to boycott the event by sending 0 representatives to Montreal to make their selections. After the draft, the NHL sent a countersuit of $78 million to the Blues, and eventually the ownership group sold and the Blues remained in St. Louis. This is the one and only time that any NHL team has decided to boycott the draft and not make any selections. It hasn't happened since, and I can't imagine that this will ever happen again. But for the Blues, this could have had a long-term impact on this organization because some of the selections in that draft were actually pretty talented and changed some other organizations. Like I said, I think it's safe to say, though, we aren't going to see another team boycott this event, especially because of a relocation thing. Guys, every day I'm on my phone researching hockey to give you guys some content like this, just trying to keep up to date with the sport and all of the stuff that continues to happen. But you would not believe how many spam phone calls and texts that I get throughout the day. I mean, seriously, I'll be in the middle of researching a topic where I'll get like 4 or 5 phone calls in a row, just completely throwing off my vibe. And I know one of the big reasons we get all these spam texts and calls is because big companies can't keep our data safe. Recently, Ticketmaster was hacked and the data of 560 million users were put up for sale on the dark web. The data stolen includes full names, addresses, email addresses, phone numbers, and credit card data. At best, this could just lead to a ton of spam and you could just be annoyed, but at its very worst, this could actually lead to fraud. And what exactly is Ticketmaster doing about this? Well, honestly, nothing. They said they didn't think the hack would have any material impact on an overall business, so as a business, they're happily willing to collect our data, but do nothing about it or protect us in any way. That's why I use Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura alerts me when my data has been part of a data breach or leaked on the dark web. It gives me fast fraud alerts if anyone tries to use that data to access my credit card or my bank accounts. And it also removes my information from the data broker websites, so that way I get less spam. I also get things like transaction monitoring, a VPN, antivirus, parental controls, and a password manager, along with identity theft insurance. I get all all of this in one app and at an incredibly affordable price. If my info were compromised by Ticketmaster in a data breach, I wouldn't worry because Aura is always on, always doing the hard work and keeping me safe. I'm not leaving myself or my family vulnerable to data breaches, and if you don't want to either, you can go to aura.com/JimmyHockey and try your first 2 weeks for free. I'll also leave the link in the description for you guys to check out. Again, thank you to Aura for sponsoring this video, and let's get right back into it. Next story on my list is about a player suffering a very traumatic event on the ice, and I don't think a lot of people know about this story. It's 1998 and the Detroit Red Wings and St. Louis Blues are facing off in the Western Conference semis. May 10th, and Chris Pronger, then 23 years old and playing on the St. Louis Blues, was struck by a slap shot from Dmitry Mironov of the Detroit Red Wings. The impact from this shot caught Pronger up high and was so devastating that he staggered forward and fell onto the ice, leaving him unconscious. Pronger would recall opening his eyes 20 to 30 seconds later to see the worried faces of his teammates, not realizing that this slap shot had stopped his heart from beating. After being taken out on a stretcher, Pronger had his heart monitored for 24 hours and returned to the Blues lineup for the very next game. Unfortunately for the Blues, the Red Wings would go on to win this series and eventually the Stanley Cup, but Pronger would actually not really be affected by this event at all. Like I said, he returned to the next game and then had a very healthy career afterwards. Pronger would go on to win a Hart Trophy in the 1999-2000 season and finish his career with 698 points in 1,167 games played. Now, we've seen some freak accidents in the NHL, but this might be one of the few times that we've seen an NHL player actually get so seriously injured by something as little as a slap shot. Safe to say, I think a lot of players are a bit more cautious about taking pucks up high, but honestly, seeing some of the ways that these players block shots, I don't think a lot of them have heard about this story because it would freak me out if I was a player. Next up, we talk about franchises relocating a lot, but we never really talk about franchises who have had success and then potentially are going to be moved afterwards. Let me explain. This NHL franchise nearly up and moved after winning their first Stanley Cup. The New Jersey Devils have become a valuable franchise to the NHL, but in the early days of the organization's history, it wasn't always smooth sailing. The New Jersey Devils began in 1982, after relocating from the Kansas City Scouts to the Colorado Rockies, and then finally from Colorado to New Jersey. Being squished between two powerhouse teams in the New York Islanders and New York Rangers, the Devils had a challenging time fostering an audience due to their limited success during their first decade. While there was a ton of value in New Jersey, and the team was capable of achieving a championship, the league began to play around with the idea of relocating the organization once more, but this time it was going to be to Nashville. In the 1994-95 hockey season, the Devils put together a very great roster filled with talented players. They would then go on to win their first Stanley Cup, but still the league was considering moving the franchise despite their newfound success. Any deal to move the Devils to Nashville eventually did simmer off, and New Jersey would go on to win multiple cups while Nashville would later enter the NHL as an expansion team in a different draft. Now, there's a ton of examples of teams who have had some poor management or just don't really have the market to sustain an NHL team be relocated, but we've never seen a team that has had success and an audience potentially get moved for whatever reasons the NHL was considering back in the day. This is one of the more crazy stories about a successful team getting relocated, but thankfully for New Jersey and their fans, they stayed in this area and continue to have success even to this day, with a potential team that could go on to win a Stanley Cup even this year. Next up, we're heading back to the draft, but this time we're talking about an NHL team that not only tricked the entire hockey world, but the NHL itself by drafting a fake player. Back in 1974, the Buffalo Sabres pulled off one of the greatest hockey pranks of all time. That year, the NHL was concerned about the World Hockey Association tampering with the draft event, opting to conduct the selection process over the phone for added safety. It's reported that GMs were aggravated with the length of the selection process, with some waiting as much of an hour to make a single pick. Punch Imlach, the GM of the Sabres at the time, devised a plan with Director of Communications Paul Whelan to draft a Japanese player with their 11th round pick. The only problem with this was that the player never actually existed. So Whelan called his friend who owned a Japanese garden supply business in New York, and the two created the fictional name Taro Sushi Sugimoto. When it came time to make the selection, the Sabres announced they would be taking Taro Sugimoto of the Tokyo Katanas of the Japanese Hockey League, with katana being the Japanese word for sabres. Sugimoto has become a legend for Buffalo sports lore, and there are even rookie cards and jerseys created after this fictional player that some fans still wear to their games to this day, furthering the legendary prank made back in 1974. Now, this is one of the most wild pranks that any NHL team has ever performed. They managed to keep this a secret through media reports as well as training camp, and the legacy of Sugimoto is still very alive even today in Buffalo. Wild story, and the fact that the NHL wasn't able to detect this just continues to add to this legendary prank that Whelan and Imlach pulled off so many years ago. Next, let's talk about trades, and like we were talking about with organizations earlier and relocating, the same can be said when it comes to trading players. Now, this rookie put up 76 goals in his rookie season, but still was traded by this organization. Every hockey fan knows the name Teemu Selanne. The Finnish Flash was one of the most exciting players to watch throughout his illustrious NHL tenure, but the start of his career was anything but smooth sailing. Selanne was drafted by the Winnipeg Jets and acclimated to the city very quickly, becoming a fan favorite after just one season. But despite his early success, Selanne was not considered the most valuable asset for this organization, and let me explain why. Selanne's departure from Winnipeg came in February of 1996, when he was traded to the Anaheim Ducks, a moment that he said changed the trajectory of his career. Weeks prior to the trade, Selanne remembers reading stories in the newspaper that the team couldn't afford to have 3 highly paid players on their roster, so they would be forced to either deal one of the 3 players, Alexei Zamnov, Keith Tkachuk, or Teemu Selanne. Now, Selanne was also dealing with a severed Achilles tendon injury that many believe would derail his career and not allow him to return to that spectacular rookie player he once was. Leading up to the eventual trade, the new owner of the Jets, Richard Burke, called Selanne to ease his concerns. He recalls Burke telling him not to worry about the trade buzz and that he was going to be a part of the franchise's future as they considered moving to Phoenix. Then one afternoon, when he was practicing with the team, head coach Terry Simpson pulled Selanne off the ice, telling him there was a phone call waiting for him in his office. This phone call was to tell Selanne he had been traded to the Anaheim Ducks. Despite telling the legendary Finnish player that he would stay with the organization, the Jets had to choose one of these players to move on from, and with how contracts are structured and the state of Selanne's injury, they felt that Teemu's contract was the easiest to deal, a choice I'm sure the organization regrets to this day. Selanne's first full season with the Ducks, he tucked 58 goals, and through the rest of his career, he became a legendary figure not only for their organization, but for hockey in general. Hard to believe that a player like Selanne was moved after having such a successful rookie season, but I guess that's just the reality of the NHL. It's a business, and if the finances don't work, well, then you have to move off from someone. The only thing that bugs me about this story with the Jets is that they lied to Teemu and were telling him he was going to stay with the organization, and then just a few days later moved off from him. That to me was just a little bit disappointing to see. Eventually, the Jets got to a better place. Teemu had a good career, so all was fine. And if you watch anything with Teemu nowadays, the guy is the most chill and happy dude in the world. So I think everything worked out in the end, but this was a crazy story that really could have changed the entire trajectory for the Winnipeg Jets had they kept Selanne instead of one of those other players. Next up, let's talk about NHL coaches and how much power they have over some players, especially when it comes to reaching milestones. Well, this story, it's a little bit controversial, featuring everyone's least favorite coach in NHL history. Every hockey fan knows the name Mike Babcock, and this story is about one of the league's most controversial head coaches and how he prevented a player from reaching a major milestone in his career. In nearly 1,500 career regular season NHL games, star center Mike Modano carved out a Hockey Hall of Fame legacy for himself. But one word should stand out about that last sentence, and that's nearly. Mike Modano played with the Dallas Stars franchise for over 20 years, and is arguably considered one of the greatest, if not the greatest, American-born hockey player in NHL history. In his tenure with the Dallas Stars, Modano played in 1,459 games with 1,359 points. In his final year ahead of the 2010-2011 season, he decided he wanted to return to his hometown of Detroit to finish playing his career as a Red Wing. At the time, the Red Wings were a few seasons removed from their Stanley Cup championship, and Mike Babcock was the head coach for the organization, making it a somewhat attractive destination for any veteran looking looking to compete for one final Stanley Cup, especially when you consider that this was his hometown and everything aligned so perfectly. Now, if you're a fan of hockey, I'm sure you've heard of Mike Babcock, and while he did have some success throughout his career, being mainly known for his time with the Red Wings, he also has had some strange scandals he's been involved with, which is why I call him the most unorthodox coach in NHL history. This is the guy who hadn't coached a single game with the Columbus Blue Jackets, but managed to break news because of his unorthodox coaching methods, asking players to look through their phones so he could get to know them better. The guy who received a massive contract from the Maple Leafs and then decided to make Mitch Marner rank his teammates based on their work ethic. Not exactly the most orthodox coach in the world, and this is just a few of the scandals that we actually know about. Who knows what else he did to some of the players in the league, or if we'll ever actually find out. But this one thing, again, it stands out to me above all of the others. Modano signed with the Wings and appeared in 40 games that season, which for a 40-year-old was pretty impressive. But something you might not know is that Modano had actually played in 1,499 games up to this point, and there were still a handful of games on the schedule, meaning that he could actually reach a milestone that very few NHL players have reached, which is playing in 1,500 games. Of course, though, in typical Mike Babcock fashion, he decided to healthy scratch Modano for the rest of the season, never allowing the legend to reach that milestone in his final season. Modano would then finish his career with 1,499 games played, and to this day, he's talked about it to the media, saying how he never fully understands why Babcock did this, and this is just going to go down as another little antic thing that Babcock did throughout his coaching tenure. I think this is the most dislikable thing that a head coach could do to a player, especially when we're talking about legendary players like Modano himself. Babcock will go down as one of the most unlikable, unorthodox coaches in NHL history, and I think it's safe to say that every hockey fan dislikes him at this point. Next up, we're talking about injuries again, and this one, strangely, is the only time this has ever happened in NHL history. This NHL player recorded a goal in a game that he never actually played in. Columbus Blue Jackets right wing Nathan Horton will go down as an answer to a very unique bit of hockey trivia. Nathan Horton initially scored his goal in the first period of a March 10th match between the Dallas Stars and the Columbus Blue Jackets, but the game was postponed about 4 minutes later when Stars forward Rich Peverley collapsed on the bench following a cardiac emergency. The two teams decided to postpone this game for about a month due to this event, agreeing to a new 60-minute match, but with the Blue Jackets opening up with a 1-0 lead that they attained through Horton's goal. However, since the game happened a month prior, the two teams weren't beholden to the same lineups that they used on March 10th. As a result, Nathan Horton was able to sit out on the Wednesday matchup, having aggravated a lower body injury a night earlier in a game against the Phoenix Coyotes. With Horton sitting out, his goal officially went down at the 0 mark of the first period. Horton's goal represents the only known instance in NHL history in which a player was credited with a goal in a game he didn't play. It's not the first time a player has scored a point under such circumstances, but this is the only time a player has scored a goal in these certain circumstances. Thankfully, Rich Peverley would go on to have a clean bill of health, but Nathan Horton is the one who has the strangest record because of this unfortunate event. But these are some of the craziest stories in NHL history that almost seem fake. If you guys enjoyed this video and want a part 2, let me know in the comments below. Also, comment some other crazy stories that you know about from NHL and hockey history. Thank you guys for watching. As always, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. I will see you guys in the next one.